Chanel. Grandpa never let anyone near that shed, which means that's exactly where we need to start. Do you really think he left us something? Grandpa always planned 3 moves.
Family loyalty dissolved the moment Arthur Jimenez's casket hit the dirt. His greedy children demanded an immediate sale of the 40-acre estate, dismissing the granddaughters who actually loved him. But before the bulldozers could arrive, 2 sisters broke into a forbidden shed and unearthed a reality-shattering secret. Arthur Jimenez had been the kind of man who spoke little but anchored everything. When his heart finally gave out on a damp Tuesday morning, the vacuum he left behind was immediately filled by the shrieking demands of his estranged children. Chanel Jimenez stood by the bay window of the old farmhouse, her knuckles white as she gripped the chipped wooden sill. Outside, the Oregon rain battered the porch, matching the dismal atmosphere inside the living room. She was 28, a pragmatist by nature, and fiercely protective of the only real home she had ever known. Beside her sat her younger sister, Brittany, who was violently shredding a damp paper tissue into tiny, unrecognizable clumps. The 2 sisters had been raised by their grandfather after their parents died in a collision on Interstate 5 nearly 2 decades ago. Arthur had been their father, their mother, and their guardian. To the rest of the family, however, Arthur was simply an obstacle hoarding a very lucrative piece of real estate. Sitting across from them on Arthur's threadbare floral sofa was their uncle, Roland Jimenez. Roland wore a charcoal suit that cost more than the tractor rusting out in the north pasture. He was flanked by Aunt Marjorie Caldwell, a woman whose face was pulled so tight by cosmetic procedures that her expressions barely registered, though her disdain was palpable. "We are not waiting for the probate dust to settle," Roland announced, checking a heavy gold watch on his wrist. "The estate is fundamentally insolvent, Chanel. Dad was living on borrowed time and borrowed money. I've already spoken to Gregory Davies over at Apex Holdings. They want the land for a suburban subdivision, and they are willing to pay cash. We close the deal, pay off the debts, and wash our hands of this money pit." Brittany stopped shredding the tissue and glared at him. "He's been dead for 3 days, Roland. The funeral was yesterday. Can you at least pretend to grieve before you carve up his life?" "Don't take that tone with me, young lady," Marjorie snapped, crossing her legs. "We are being practical. You 2 have been living here rent-free, playing farm girls while your grandfather sunk further into the red. Roland has a bridge loan against the property deed. If we don't sell to Apex Holdings by the end of the month, the bank seizes it anyway. We get nothing. You get nothing. We are trying to save you from your own childish sentimentality." Chanel turned away from the window. "Grandpa never mentioned a bridge loan. He told me the mortgage was cleared 5 years ago. He showed me the paperwork." Roland let out a sharp, patronizing laugh. Dad's mind was going, "Chanel, you know that." He was shuffling papers around, pretending he was still the master of the universe. "The reality is, he signed over power of attorney to me 6 months ago when his spells started getting worse. I hold the reins now. The paperwork is filed with the county. I'm bringing Gregory and his appraisers here tomorrow morning to do the final walkthrough. You and Brittany need to have his personal effects cleared out by Sunday. The bulldozers are scheduled for site prep on the 1st of the month." The sheer audacity of the timeline left Chanel breathless. "Sunday? That's 4 days from now. You expect us to pack up 50 years of a man's life in 4 days?" "Rent a dumpster," Roland replied coldly, standing up and buttoning his suit jacket. "Most of it is junk anyway, just old books, broken tools, and moth-eaten clothes. Take whatever sentimental trinkets you want, but the heavy clearing starts Monday. If you're still here, you'll be treated as trespassers." Marjorie stood as well, offering a tight, unconvincing smile. "It's for the best, girls. You need to move on. Go to the city. Get real jobs. This dirt isn't your future." Without waiting for a response, the 2 siblings let themselves out, the heavy oak front door slamming shut behind them. The silence that followed was suffocating, broken only by the relentless drumming of the rain against the glass. Brittany buried her face in her hands, letting out a frustrated sob. "He's going to pave over everything, Chanel. The apple orchard, the barn, the pond. All of it, turning into generic gray houses. And there's nothing we can do." Chanel felt a cold, hard knot forming in her stomach. She walked over to Arthur's old oak roll-top desk in the corner of the room. She ran her fingers over the wood, feeling the grooves and scratches left by decades of accounting, letter writing, and quiet contemplation. "Something is wrong," Chanel muttered, her eyes narrowing as she pulled open the top drawer. "What do you mean?" Brittany sniffled, looking up. Grandpa's mind wasn't going. He was sharper than a tack right up until his heart gave out. "He beat me at chess 2 days before he died." He remembered the exact serial number of a water pump he bought in 1998. He didn't have spells. Roland is lying. But if Roland has the power of attorney, then Roland forged it Or tricked him into signing it under the guise of something else, Chanel said, her voice dropping to a fierce whisper. Grandpa despised Apex Holdings. They've been trying to buy the Jimenez farm for 10 years. He told them to go to hell every single time. He would never, ever authorize Roland to sell it to them. Chanel began furiously rummaging through the desk, tossing old receipts, utility bills, and farming catalogs onto the floor. He kept everything. B. If there was a bridge loan, there's a paper trail. If there wasn't, there's a paper trail. We just need to find it. They spent the next 6 hours tearing the farmhouse apart. They emptied every filing cabinet, overturned every mattress, and scoured the dusty, spider-infested attic. They found birth certificates, old wartime love letters between Arthur and their grandmother, and a terrifying amount of property tax receipts, all paid in full, firmly contradicting Roland's claims of insolvency. But they found no deed, no bank statements from the last year, and no evidence of a bridge loan. It was as if someone had systematically sterilized Arthur's records. By midnight, the sisters sat exhausted on the living room floor, surrounded by a chaotic sea of paper. Brittany rubbed her red, tired eyes. Roland already got to it. He must have come in here while we were at the hospital and taken the real files. We have no proof, Chanel. It's his word and his expensive lawyers against 2 grieving grandkids. We've lost. Chanel stared blankly at a faded photograph of Arthur standing proudly in front of the farmhouse, holding a young Chanel on his shoulders. Her gaze drifted past her grandfather's smiling face to the background of the image. Far in the distance, partially obscured by a massive weeping willow, was the old corrugated steel shed. Her heart skipped a beat. The storm broke just before dawn, leaving the sprawling 40-acre farm cloaked in a thick, eerie layer of ground fog. The wet grass soaked through Chanel's boots as she marched decisively across the back pasture. A heavy pair of iron bolt cutters slung over her right shoulder. Brittany trailed closely behind, holding a heavy-duty flashlight and shivering in the crisp morning air. Chanel, this is crazy, Brittany whispered. Though there was no one around to hear them, he explicitly told us never to go in there. It was his one hard rule. Stay out of the rust bucket or you'll catch tetanus just breathing the air. I know what he said, Chanel replied, pushing through a dense thicket of aggressive blackberry brambles that clawed at her denim jeans. But think about it, B. When we were kids, we played in the hayloft. We climbed the silos. We ran through the machinery barn. He never cared. He only cared about the shed. He acted like it was radioactive. And it's the only place on this entire property Roland wouldn't think to look, because Roland hasn't stepped foot in the mud out here since 1995. The shed came into view, looming like a forgotten relic at the very edge of the property line, bordering the thick, untamed Oregon woods. It was a miserable-looking structure, made of heavily oxidized corrugated metal that had turned a violent shade of rust orange. The roof was sagging, choked by decades of moss and dead leaves, and the single window had been boarded up with thick planks of rotting cedar from the inside. Securing the heavy sliding metal door was a massive, modern master padlock, a jarringly shiny piece of hardware, against the decaying metal of the hasp. Look at that, Chanel said, dropping the bolt cutters to the wet grass and pointing at the lock. The shed looks like a stiff breeze would knock it over, but that lock is heavy-duty steel. It's expensive. And it's brand new. There isn't a speck of rust on it. Grandpa put this on recently. Brittany stepped closer, aiming the flashlight beam at the lock. Do you think the files are in there? I think whatever he wanted to hide from Roland is in there, Chanel said grimly. She picked up the bolt cutters, aligned the heavy steel jaws around the shackle of the padlock, and threw her entire body weight onto the handles. It took 3 agonizing attempts, her muscles screaming with the effort, before a sharp crack echoed through the silent morning. The severed padlock fell into the mud. Chanel kicked it aside and grabbed the handle of the sliding door. It was rusted onto its tracks, refusing to budge. Help me, she grunted. Brittany grabbed the edge of the door, and on the count of 3, both sisters hauled backward with all their might. With a horrific, metal-on-metal screech that sent a flock of crows scattering from the nearby willow tree, the door slid open just enough for them to squeeze inside. The air inside the shed was thick, stale, and smelled overwhelmingly of dry rot, old motor oil, and dust. Brittany clicked on the flashlight, sweeping the bright white beam through the gloom. At first glance, it was exactly what Arthur had claimed it was, a junkyard. The space was crammed floor to ceiling with useless detritus. There were stacks of dry-rotted tires, rusted lawnmower engines, decaying wooden pallets, and boxes spilling over with bent nails and oxidized pipe fittings. It was a hoarder's paradise, a chaotic mess of heavy, worthless metal. Great, Brittany coughed. waving the dust away from her face. A tetanus factory, just like he promised. Chanel wasn't deterred. She stepped cautiously into the narrow aisle carved between the towers of junk, her eyes scanning the floor. "This is camouflage," she said quietly. "Camouflage? Chanel, it's garbage. Look at the dust layer," Chanel instructed, pointing to a stack of tires near the wall. "It's thick, undisturbed for years. But look at the floor." Brittany aimed the flashlight down. The concrete floor in the center of the shed, though filthy, showed faint, unmistakable scuff marks, drag marks. Someone had been moving things out of the way, creating a clear path toward the back left corner of the structure, where a massive, heavy canvas tarp was draped over what looked like a mound of old wooden shipping crates. Chanel moved toward the back, carefully navigating the tight space. She grabbed the edge of the dust-caked tarp and gave it a violent pull. A massive cloud of dirt billowed into the air, forcing both sisters to step back, coughing into their sleeves. When the dust finally settled, Brittany directed the beam onto the uncovered area. Beneath the tarp wasn't a stack of crates, but a raised wooden platform made of thick oak planks, sitting flush against the dirt and concrete. At the center of the platform was a heavy, recessed iron pull ring. "A trap door?" Brittany breathed, her eyes wide. "In the shed? Help me lift it," Chanel demanded, dropping to her knees and gripping the cold iron ring. Brittany set the flashlight on a nearby bucket, illuminating the platform, and knelt beside her sister. They both grabbed the ring. "1, 2, 3, pull!" Chanel shouted. The heavy oak door groaned in protest, fighting against years of gravity and disuse. The sisters strained, their boots slipping on the dusty concrete, until the door finally gave way, swinging upward on massive, heavy-duty iron hinges. A rush of cold, perfectly dry, conditioned air blew up from the darkness below. It didn't smell like rot or rust. It smelled faint, sharp, and metallic like ozone, leather, and machine grease. Brittany grabbed the flashlight and shined it down into the opening. Instead of a dirt root cellar, the beam revealed a set of smooth, poured concrete steps descending into pitch blackness. Along the wall of the stairwell was a modern, metal handrail and a thick electrical conduit pipe leading downward. "Chanel," Brittany whispered, terror and awe mixing in her voice. "What is this?" "I don't know," Chanel said, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. "But we're going to find out. Keep the light steady." Chanel took the first step down, the concrete cold and solid beneath her boots. She felt along the wall beside the electrical conduit and found a smooth, plastic switch plate. She flicked it up. Instantly, a heavy mechanical hum vibrated through the ground, and a series of harsh, industrial fluorescent lights flickered to life, buzzing loudly before stabilizing into a brilliant, blinding white glow. The darkness was banished, revealing a space that completely defied the rusted, decaying shed above. Chanel and Brittany stood at the top of the stairs, utterly paralyzed by what they were looking at. The staircase descended roughly 20 feet below the surface, opening into a massive, cavernous subterranean bunker that stretched far beyond the footprint of the shed above it. The walls were reinforced with thick, corrugated steel bulkheads, and the floor was coated in a pristine, high-gloss gray epoxy resin that reflected the overhead lights like a mirror. A heavy-duty industrial dehumidifier hummed quietly in the corner, keeping the air bone-dry and cool. It wasn't a cellar. It was a high-security vault. As the sisters slowly walked down the steps, their boots echoing sharply in the cavernous space, the true scale of their grandfather's secret came into focus. Parked in the center of the massive room, gleaming under the fluorescent lights, were 4 automobiles, but they weren't tractors or farm trucks. "Oh my God," Brittany gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. Chanel felt the breath leave her lungs. Even without being a car enthusiast, the sheer presence of the machines commanded absolute reverence. The first 3 cars were identical in shape but distinct in color. One deep sapphire blue, one blood red, and one British racing green. They were low-slung, fiercely aerodynamic roadsters with aggressive front grills, side exit exhaust pipes, and wide, menacing tires. The silver Cobra emblems on their fenders gleamed immaculately. They were 1960s. Shelby. 427. Cobras. They looked entirely untouched, perfectly preserved, as if they had just rolled off the assembly line yesterday. But it was the 4th car, sitting elevated on a hydraulic display lift in the back of the bunker, that truly anchored the room. It was an absolute leviathan of automotive history, a 1930s Duesenberg Model J, stretching nearly 20 feet long. Its bodywork was a flawless, mirror-finish black, adorned with sweeping chrome fenders, massive wire spoke wheels, and the iconic, arrogant hood ornament. It belonged in a museum, surrounded by velvet ropes and armed guards. Here, it sat hidden beneath a blackberry patch in rural Oregon. These are worth millions, Brittany stammered, walking in a daze toward the blue cobra and stopping just inches from the flawless paint, terrified to touch it. Tens of millions. Chanel, how did Grandpa get these? Why are they here? I don't know, Chanel said, slowly walking past the lineup of priceless machines. Her mind was spinning, trying to reconcile the image of Arthur Jimenez, a man who wore the same patched denim overalls for 10 years and complained about the price of chicken feed, with the owner of a multi-million-dollar subterranean automotive collection. But as Chanel reached the far wall of the bunker, her attention shifted away from the cars. Built into the steel bulkhead was a long, heavy steel workbench. Above the bench, pinned to a massive corkboard, was a dizzying, interconnected web of documents, photographs, bank statements, and newspaper clippings, all tied together with red string. It looked like a homicide detective's murder board. Chanel rushed to the workbench, her eyes frantically darting across the pinned documents. At the center of the board was an 8x10 glossy photograph of Uncle Roland, shaking hands with Gregory Davies in front of the Apex Holdings corporate headquarters. Above the photo, written in Arthur's unmistakable sharp cursive on a yellow index card, were the words, "The Hemlock Project, 2024. B, get over here, now," Chanel commanded, her voice trembling with adrenaline. Brittany tore her eyes away from the Duesenberg and hurried over. She let out a soft gasp as she took in the wall of information. "What is all this?" Brittany asked, scanning the documents. "It's proof," Chanel said, a feral, triumphant smile breaking across her face. "It's the whole damn thing." Chanel began pointing to the specific clusters of documents. "Look, these are the farm's original deed and water rights. And right next to them, these are offshore bank wire transfers from Apex Holdings to a shell company in the Cayman Islands. A shell company named RPC Consulting." "RPC," Brittany muttered. "Roland Jimenez. Consulting?" "Exactly. Roland hasn't just been trying to force a sale. He's been sabotaging the farm for years to lower its valuation so Apex could buy it for pennies on the dollar. And Apex has been paying him under the table to do it." Chanel traced the red string down to a series of heavily redacted legal documents. "He didn't hold a bridge loan, B. Look at this." Chanel unpinned a clear plastic sleeve containing a highly detailed forensic accounting report, complete with a verified signature from a prominent Portland private investigator. Grandpa hired an investigator. He knew Roland was embezzling from the estate. Roland forged the power of attorney. He forged the bridge loan documents, and he illegally diverted the farm's agricultural water supply to ruin our crop yields for the last 3 seasons to manufacture a bankruptcy. Brittany was shaking her head, the shock giving way to a boiling, righteous anger. Roland broke the law. He stole from his own father. He caused the farm to fail, and he was going to throw us out on the street to cover his tracks. He thought Grandpa was just a senile old farmer, Chanel said, her voice turning cold as ice. He thought he could just wait him out, let him die, and bury the evidence under a subdivision. Chanel looked down at the heavy steel workbench. Sitting squarely in the center was a thick, black, leather-bound ledger, and resting on top of it was a sealed white envelope with Chanel and Brittany's names written on it in Arthur's handwriting. Chanel picked up the envelope. Her hands shook slightly as she broke the wax seal and pulled out a single sheet of heavy stationery. She read the letter aloud, her voice echoing in the silent bunker. "My dearest Chanel and Brittany, if you are reading this, I am gone, and Roland has undoubtedly shown his fangs. I am sorry I kept this room, and this burden, a secret from you for so long. The cars were a legacy from your great-grandfather, smuggled out of the public eye during the Great Depression. They are fully insured, legally owned by a blind trust in your names, and are worth enough to buy Apex Holdings 10 times over. But the cars are merely metal and paint. The true value of this room is on the wall before you. I spent the last 3 years of my life building an airtight, federal-level fraud and racketeering case against my own son. It broke my heart to realize what he had become, but it would break my soul to let him steal your home. The ledger on the desk contains every original document, every audio recording, and every piece of financial proof you need to destroy him and Gregory Davies. I did not have the time to bring it to the authorities before my heart failed. Take the ledger to the district attorney in Portland. Do not warn Roland. Do not hesitate. Burn his empire to the ground. I love you both. Defend our home. Grandpa, Arthur." Chanel lowered the letter. A heavy, absolute silence fell over the bunker, punctuated only by the steady hum of the dehumidifier. The crushing grief that had weighed her down for 3 days instantly evaporated, replaced by a razor-sharp, blinding clarity. They weren't helpless victims anymore. They were armed. Brittany looked at her sister, her eyes hardened, the tears completely gone. Roland is bringing Gregory Davies and the appraisers to the house tomorrow morning at 9 to do the final walkthrough. Chanel gently placed Arthur's letter back onto the workbench and picked up the heavy black ledger. It weighed like a cinder block in her hands, a literal brick of justice. "Then we better be ready to welcome them," Chanel said softly. "Let's go back upstairs. We have a trap to set." The transition from the cold, clinical glow of the subterranean bunker back into the gray, damp morning air felt like stepping between two different realities. Chanel and Brittany hauled the heavy oak trapdoor shut, the iron hinges groaning as they sealed the multi-million-dollar secret beneath the earth. They meticulously pulled the canvas tarp back over the wooden platform, kicked a layer of dirt and rusted metal shards over the edges to disguise the seam, and slid the heavy corrugated shed door shut. Armed with the black leather-bound ledger, Chanel did not sleep that night. Neither did Brittany. They sat at the scarred wooden kitchen table, drinking pot after pot of bitter black coffee, carefully dissecting the contents of Arthur's final gift. The ledger was a masterpiece of investigative accounting. Arthur had not merely suspected his son, he had surgically documented Roland's entire criminal enterprise. There were stamped photographs of Roland meeting with Apex Holdings executives at high-end steakhouses. There were copies of wire transfers from Apex to the offshore RPC consulting accounts. Most damning of all, there was a certified forensic analysis of the power of attorney document, definitively proving that Arthur's signature had been traced and forged by Roland's own hand. Tucked into the very back pocket of the ledger was a business card for an assistant United States attorney based in Portland named David Harrison. On the back of the card, Arthur had written a simple instruction: "Call him when the time comes. He is waiting." At 6 a.m., as the first rays of weak sunlight broke through the Oregon clouds, Chanel dialed the number. She spoke for 10 minutes, outlining the situation, the evidence in the ledger, and the scheduled 9 a.m. walkthrough with Roland and Apex Holdings. The voice on the other end of the line was calm, sharp, and intensely focused. Harrison promised he would not let Arthur's work go to waste. By 8:45 a.m., the farmhouse was eerily quiet. The sisters sat on the front porch swing, a heavy wool blanket draped over their laps, watching the long gravel driveway. Precisely at 9 o'clock, a convoy of 3 sleek, black luxury SUVs turned off the county highway and crunched up the driveway, utterly destroying the morning peace. The vehicles parked in a neat line in front of the farmhouse. The doors opened in unison, and the vultures descended. Roland Jimenez stepped out of the lead vehicle, wearing a tailored navy suit and a supremely arrogant smile. He was followed by Aunt Marjorie, looking deeply inconvenienced by the mud on the gravel, and Gregory Davies, a sharp-featured man with slicked-back hair who looked at the Jimenez farm not as a home, but as a blank spreadsheet waiting to be populated with profit margins. Behind them trailed 2 men in polo shirts carrying clipboards and laser measuring devices. The appraisers. "Morning, girls," Roland called out, his voice dripping with faux sympathy and boundless condescension. "I see you're up early. Good. I hope you have your bags packed." The appraisers need to measure the interior footprint before the demolition crews map the foundation next week. Gregory Davies stepped forward, rubbing his hands together against the morning chill. "It's a beautiful piece of land, Roland. Once we clear out these old structures and grade the hills, we can fit at least 80 premium lots here. It's going to be a flagship community for Apex." "I have no doubt, Gregory," Roland beamed, walking up the wooden steps to the porch. He stopped in front of Chanel and Brittany, holding out an open palm. "Keys, Chanel. The charade is over. We have work to do, and you two need to vacate the premises." Chanel did not move. She remained seated on the swing, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Beside her, Brittany stared at their uncle with a look of such profound disgust that Roland momentarily faltered. "I said," Roland snapped, his patience evaporating instantly, "hand over the keys. You are trespassing on Apex Holdings property." "It is an Apex property," Chanel said, her voice steady and echoing clearly across the porch. "And it never will be. Grandpa didn't sell it to you, and he certainly never gave you the authority to sell it on his behalf." Marjorie sighed theatrically, rolling her eyes. "Oh, for heaven's sake, Roland, call the sheriff. I told you they would be difficult. They're acting like spoiled children." "I am the legal executor of this estate," Roland sneered, pulling a folded legal document from his breast pocket and waving it in Chanel's face. "I have a signed power of attorney. I have the bridge loan documents. This farm is bankrupt, and I am liquidating it. If you do not hand me the keys in the next 5 seconds, I will have you physically removed by the police. You don't need to call the police, Roland. A new, authoritative voice rang out from the side of the house. Roland spun around. Walking out from the shadows of the wraparound porch were 4 men. 2 of them were uniformed Oregon State troopers, their hands resting comfortably near their duty belts. The third man was in a sharp gray suit, holding a sleek leather briefcase. The fourth was a silver-haired man with a stern, unforgiving face, Assistant U.S. Attorney David Harrison. They had arrived 30 minutes earlier, parking their unassuming sedans behind the old machinery barn, out of sight from the main driveway. Roland's face drained of color, his arrogant smile vanishing into a mask of pure confusion. Who are you? What is the meaning of this? My name is David Harrison. I'm with the United States Attorney's Office, the silver-haired man said, stepping onto the porch and flashing his federal credentials. And we are here at the invitation of the current, legal owners of this property, Chanel and Brittany Jimenez. Gregory Davies took a cautious step backward, his eyes darting toward his SUV. Roland, what is going on here? I don't know, Roland stammered, trying to regain his composure. He puffed out his chest and pointed a trembling finger at Chanel. This is absurd. These girls own nothing. I am the executor. I have the power of attorney. Chanel finally stood up. She reached beneath the wool blanket on the swing and produced the thick, black, leather-bound ledger. She walked to the edge of the porch, looking down at her uncle with eyes as hard as flint. You have a forgery, Roland, Chanel stated coldly. A forgery that Grandpa knew about the moment you filed it. He knew everything. He knew about the agricultural sabotage. He knew about the offshore accounts. He knew about RPC Consulting. At the mention of his shell company, Roland's knees visibly buckled. He grabbed the porch railing to steady himself, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly like a suffocating fish. RPC Consulting, David Harrison echoed, opening his briefcase and extracting a thick stack of printed documents. A Cayman Islands holding company that has received over $2.5 million in consulting fees from Apex Holdings over the last 3 years. Fees paid directly in exchange for the deliberate sabotage and devaluation of the Jimenez farm. You starved your father's crops, you poisoned his soil, and you falsified his debts, all to manufacture a fraudulent bankruptcy. Gregory Davies was now openly sweating. He turned to his appraisers. Get in the cars. We are leaving. Right now. Nobody is leaving, one of the state troopers commanded, stepping off the porch and blocking the path to the SUVs. Marjorie, realizing the catastrophic shift in power, desperately tried to distance herself. She backed away from Roland, holding her hands up in mock innocence. I had nothing to do with this. Roland told me the farm was just in debt. I swear to you, I didn't know anything about offshore accounts. Save it for a deposition, Marjorie, Brittany said, her voice sharp and uncompromising. You were perfectly happy to throw us out on the street to get your cut. Roland, cornered and desperate, lunged forward, trying to snatch the black ledger from Chanel's hands. Give me that! It's mine! I'm his son! He was crazy! Chanel stepped back smoothly, while the second state trooper instantly grabbed Roland by the collar, slamming him face first into a wooden porch pillar. Roland cried out in pain as the trooper efficiently kicked his legs apart and wrenched his arms behind his back. The distinct, metallic ratcheting sound of handcuffs clicking into place echoed loudly across the driveway. Roland Jimenez, the trooper announced, his voice devoid of emotion, you are under arrest for grand larceny, wire fraud, and forgery. You have the right to remain silent. I strongly suggest you use it. Chanel watched as her uncle, the man who had worn expensive suits and looked down his nose at her for her entire life, was reduced to a weeping, pathetic mess. The charcoal suit was smeared with porch dust. His perfectly combed hair was a disheveled wreck, and his arrogant bluster had been entirely replaced